The panel will have a fuller introduction, but I just want to let you know we have Meng Chi from JP Morgan Chase, David Wong from CME Group, Debbie Brackeen from CSC Insurance Group, and Kelly Goodwin from Santander Bank.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks, you guys. Thank you for being here. There's no pressure being a double session right after lunch, right? So hopefully this will be hugely entertaining and actually very informative. And our goal this afternoon is to really to let you guys ask some questions. I'm going to ask a couple questions and moderate a bit, but as you're going to see, we have some really wise and experienced folks to give us all kinds of great understanding and experience and learning from what they've learned about how do you really drive transformative change within an organization. So as backdrop, most of you probably realize that the pace of change that we've all been living with recently has really been unprecedented, and it's kind of, everybody's been saying this for a couple of years probably, but the constant is the pace of change, right? That we're always dealing with change. But as we deal with this kind of change, for those of us in innovation or research or marketing, recognizing we have to move from a space of really knowing all the answers to really looking at assumption-driven approaches and being able to think through what are the assumptions that we're making, how do we test those, especially as we move into more transformative or disruptive types of innovation. So the folks that are on this panel have been dealing with this. They're in roles where they work on transformative types of things, whether that's from an innovation standpoint in the products or services that are sold by the companies they work with and within their own organizations. How do you really drive change to the entire business model that's inside and outside? So I'm going to actually allow each person on the panel to kind of give us a brief introduction of yourself and your role and maybe a little bit of your background. And then we'll kind of dive in and start talking about this topic of innovation and what are some of the things that you've learned. Meng, you want to start?
Sure. Hi. So I'm actually not the typical person you see from a bank. I started as a chip designer, then went on to become somewhere along the way a software CTO in startups, and then found my way to a global design firm called Frog Design and built out their digital practice around the world. And then, for whatever reason, thought, transformation is probably hardest in the corporate arena. Why don't I just go beat my head against that for a while? And so I went to Nokia, where I was an entrepreneur resident, and then Samsung, where I built out a lot of their mobile innovation capability in the States. And then now I'm at JP Morgan Chase, back to an American company. So I've worked in companies that are less than a day old to companies that are 200 years old. Have worked in companies that serve a small region to 150 countries.
Wow.
Yeah.
So honored that you're on the panel. Thank you, Meng.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Debbie?
Hi, everybody. Debbie Brackeen. I lead strategy and innovation for CSAA. Started at Stanford as pre-med, bought a Macintosh on the University Consortium program, fell in love with it. That turned into 10 years at Apple, where I did a whole bunch of different jobs and have been lucky to work with a bunch of high-tech companies in Silicon Valley, HP, eBay, among them, a couple of internet startups in the internet boom era. But I spent 7 years at HP, more than half of which suddenly there was a new term in the lexicon, which was corporate innovation and venturing, which I love to do. There just had never been a label for it before then. And that turned into almost 6 years also at a bank, not a typical person to find at a bank, but I led innovation at Citi Ventures for almost 6 years, and then about a year and a half ago joined CSA Insurance Group.
Awesome. Thanks, Debbie.
Good afternoon. Is everyone awake? So I also am not a banker that works at a bank. It's a trend. They're doing some smart things, right? So I'm a payments expert. When I became involved with the payments industry, I didn't even know it was such a thing. So I've been in payments about 2 decades, about 15 years at a company called TSYS in Columbus, Georgia, which is one of the world's largest processing companies of payments. And in my role there, first half of that tenure, I spent acquiring companies on behalf of my company. So having a very stabilized corporate culture, actually out doing due diligence on startups and fintechs before they were called fintechs in the early 2000s. So I have a pretty good set of experience bringing cultures together, working with very corporate-like entities, and also working with startups. So it's been quite an evolution. In the early 2000s, there were maybe 40 fintechs or startups kind of surrounding the payments ecosystem. Now there's like 1,400. So the evolution of financial institutions and technology and fintech have drastically changed over the last couple of decades. I then moved to a bank, spent 3 years at a bank doing strategic planning and payments. And most recently, before I joined Santander, which I've been here 2 months, I ran Visa's Innovation Center in San Francisco, hosting clients and visitors from all over the world, talking about artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, VR, and also collaborating with many startups in that specific area. And now I'm in Boston, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm leading our enterprise payments office and payments strategy for Santander US.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is David Wong. I lead innovation and growth for CME Group. Who's heard of CME Group? Just out of curiosity. Okay. Usually that's about the record. Who's heard of like a corn futures price or a gold futures price or a interest rate futures price on LIBOR or Bitcoin futures for that matter? Okay, so that's what we do at our organization. We're the world's largest and most diverse derivatives exchange. I don't know if there is a typical innovation person, and I did come from a bank, so I don't know if I fit the model. I was an accounting undergrad, and then spent time doing management consulting. Had an opportunity to get my MBA, and worked in areas of strategy, entrepreneurship, and decision sciences. Spent some time at a bank working for the chief risk officer of LaSalle Bank, ABN AMRO, North America, which was a really interesting perspective. And then have been at CME Group for over 11 years now, where I was led enterprise risk management. I was the chief of staff for one of our former CEOs. I led our business strategy and planning, and now over the last 4 years, I've been leading our innovation and growth efforts. And the way I contrast the commonality across my experience base has been uncertainty. In a bank, you manage your credit risk, your market risk, and your operational risk. You're trying to remove the uncertainty. I do the exact same thing. I focus on the exact same target in innovation. I'm just removing a different type of uncertainty. And it's more on the customer base and feasibility perspective.
Awesome. Thank you so much. What an amazing combination of experiences that you guys all bring to this panel. So I'm super excited to learn from all of you. So one of the things that I was reflecting on was anytime you go into innovation, some of you even use some of this language like beat my head against this thing, right? So there's always this challenge that comes with innovation. And I know for each of you, from what I've heard in our early discussions, and certainly for myself and others that I've met, there's a connection to something personal about why it's important to you to drive change. Why is it important to you to always be putting yourself in a position of uncertainty? Tell us a little bit for each of you. I'd love to know, like, what is it, how do you make that connection for you? What is the connection to what gets you really fired up about this space of uncertainty and change and risk and all of those things that come with the roles that you all have been in for the past many years? Anyone want to go first?
I'll go. So for me, I think I just naturally come with a kind of insatiable curiosity, and I knew very early on, before I was even done with college, that there was no way I was bound for a desk job, like same thing every day, 8 to 5 or whatever. But when I really got inspired about innovation, I think was having worked at a large company, several large companies, and then gone to do the internet startup thing for a few years. And then I reversed roles. I was doing biz dev and selling to in some cases, some of the companies that I used to work for. And then I went back to big companies again. And I always have worked with third-party developers and sort of entrepreneurs, I guess, at Apple and other places. But that impedance mismatch between like the big guys and the little guys, especially 15 or so years ago, it just really struck me, because large companies need what startups are good at, which is speed and agility and like thinking literally outside of any boundaries. But startups need what big companies have too, access to customers and distribution and other markets. And so it really just kind of, I think I naturally was sort of swimming around that ecosystem for a long time, but having switched sides twice, really, I just caught the bug where it's like, this is ridiculous. We have to figure out how to make this better because, I think fundamentally, even though, in a bank, you're being, the little fintechs, and some of them are big now, are nipping at your ankles. Really, I think they're partnership opportunities, and the same is true in the insurance industry as well.
Awesome, great, love that. Who else?
I mean, I would say, I have a passion to win, like just to be honest. Like I'm a capitalist and I like winning and I like getting paid bonuses. And when you're in a mature company and you're an innovator or an entrepreneur, you're given the opportunity to work on some pretty amazing projects because you're willing to raise your hand and say, I don't know how to do that, but I'm going to figure it out. So I like solving problems. I like taking down barriers. I like educating stakeholders. And I don't like doing the same thing, month after month, year after year. So when you have an opportunity to be an entrepreneur and you have an executive leadership team that's willing to give you some rope, you can do some pretty amazing things in large corporates. It's convincing them, to give you that rope. And so, like I said, my passion is about winning and solving consumer and businesses' problems.
Yeah, I'll echo that, and it's a level of challenge and complexity that gets me up every morning. Not knowing what the answer is and knowing that no one probably has the answer is a lot of fun. It's also a little terrifying, but then having the confidence and quite frankly a tool set to connect things together or to unpack or unravel some of the complexities, whether it's in a financial market or in what a customer is trying to do with your product. That excites me, and it excites me to then navigate that challenge with what I'll term groups of people or groups of perspectives. We all have the tools within our organization to come to the right answers and solve them. It's just the forum's not there, and the ability to share that inside information is not there either on the communicator or the receiver side of that. So it really excites me to navigate in that space. I think it's a space that will continue to be there. And to your point, I love creating value. Just absolutely love it. And when you can create value, whether that's a smile for someone or whether that's $1 billion in return to someone else, that's a huge amount of satisfaction that comes from it.
Awesome, great. We're going to come back to the tools and talk about what some of those are. But Meng, how would you answer that question?
I maybe a bit more emotional answer. I actually thrive on the both terrifying, frustrating, and magical experience of building things. And when one does it in context of companies, I'm learning, that have an immediate ecosystem which you can then toggle, then you can really affect the lives or even greatly improve things for a lot of people, and I find that deeply satisfying. But it's not about me then, it's not about one person. It's actually, I'm learning more and more, it's about how one then can energize a group of people and maybe even a culture to go attack problems like that and to treat our communities in a different way. On the even more personal side, I grew up over 30 years ago in Southeast Asia, and to me the stories that really drove my imagination, I guess that led to me coming here, were about people like Edison and Tesla and so on. And what I really noticed is that what they did really changed the fortunes of their countries and the people who lived in them. And I could see the disparity where I was growing up with what they were able to do for their countries. And so I guess that's part of what fuels me as well, as being able to somehow in my own way or small way be part of creating that change.
Wow, that's really inspirational. Thank you for sharing that. So one of the things we want to do with this panel is we want to add some value. We want to share some of the things we're working on. I think it would be helpful maybe for each of you to give us a little bit of a snapshot of some of the things you're working on right now in terms of the types of innovation that you're trying to drive. I think that'll provide good context as we start getting into what are some of the tools or strategies or tactics that you're using. So first, let's just make sure everybody kind of knows what are some of the things you guys are working on as context. Dave, you want to start? Or?
Yeah, sure, I can start. So I'll use two extremes of the spectrum of just to show you how wide some of the things that we're working on are. In one instance, we are an extreme user. We've had to, as the financial markets have electronified, it's become extremely important for those markets to be fair, to be very, very fast, and to be certain. For people that transact, here's a fun fact. Anyone know what $1,000 trillion is? It's $quadrillion. So in order to transact $quadrillion facilitate $quadrillion worth of transactions a year, that is absolutely required. And we've been on the edge of that as that's moved. As a result, there were certain solutions or certain problems that we had within our software and our match engine that we couldn't find other people to solve for us. We couldn't see inside the software. We couldn't see the message flowing through it like you'd be able to see, raw materials flowing through a manufacturing line. And so as a result, we had to create it. And we did that probably about 5-6 years ago. And we continue to hone that capability. We now have that capability, and we're looking around and saying, wait a second, this is still an unsolved problem for many in the industry. We measure in the nanosecond level of transactions, so that's a level of extremeness that we don't see anywhere else. And so an exciting thing that we're doing is looking at how might we commercialize this, or who could we commercialize this with. It's not necessarily our business model to commercialize this technology, but someone else is out there, and there are plenty of examples of this need existing in the marketplace. So that's an exciting on the exciting one end of the spectrum. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, it's something that businesses do all the time and do transactions. And one of the transactions that we announced earlier this year is Next Group, and we're entering into a transaction to purchase Next Group, which is a very different part of the financial industry than us. And so we're using our lab capability, and our lab is, I'm going to put it in air quotes, our lab is more of a place that we put people to share insights and information, to unpack it, and to shape different choices, and then to make decisions out of it. And we found that that's an extremely effective method to use. We modeled it after what Deloitte does in their greenhouses and Deloitte client experience. We just found that we could use that enough. So we're using that lab function as part of helping us shape what are some of the guiding principles, what are some of the must-haves for this acquisition that we're not going to debate. Yeah. As we've done acquisitions in the past, we found that before we had this capability, this was something that we stewed on. So it's going from the core side of the business all the way to arguably something that we don't have the business of being in.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Cool. Okay. Great. That's super helpful.
Well, I've spent most of my time in payments on business-to-business payments. So when I think back, 15, 20 years ago, trying to innovate in this space, I was doing it through forming strategic partnerships with fintechs who had permission to innovate, right? But the technology's changed so much. So what I've been working on in the last several years is looking at the open banking system, looking at how banks can use APIs that they can leverage from other fintech providers to create very unique customer experiences. Today, a financial institution can actually get a product into market in 6 to 9 months, like legitimately through compliance and risk and legal and all the federal and government checks that we have. And that would have been 5 years ago, 2 decades ago. To get a new product through a bank was incredibly challenging. So I look at blockchain, open APIs, human-centered design. How do we create new experience for a corporation and businesses that make payments? So sometimes when I'm in a bank, I get sort of like, what the hell are you talking about? Depending on who's in the audience. So it's a consistent challenging of the status quo and how things are normal, and opening eyes of what the potential of future innovation and technology could mean to a bank, whether it's voice recognition systems. There's a lot of things happening in technology that corporates can really leverage if their FIs would open up those opportunities for them. So that's what I'm passionate about, and I've kind of been dragging this around with me for many years. So I'm actually happy to be at a bank that said, tell us where you would like to drag us. So I'm really excited about that.
Awesome.
At CSC Insurance Group, we're a AAA insurer. We sell personal auto and home in about half of the U.S., 23 states and D.C. More than half of our book is personal auto, And that is heavily concentrated in California, which happens to be the birthplace of our two biggest threats, the sharing economy and autonomous vehicles being the long-term existential threat. So that's why I have a job. And we have a big, audacious goal, which is to create $1 billion in new revenue in the next decade. And now that I've been here more than a year, I say in the next decade. So it doesn't sound like 9 years, but it is. We also have a short-term revenue objective as well, which is kind of a step, kind of a down payment on that. But we're innovating. We're going to look at opportunities to diversify away from auto and away from personal. So we're actively exploring how we can play in different commercial insurance markets. But to the emerging, I helped start the blockchain work at Citi when I was there. And it took about 3 years to get our first commercial implementation of Citi Connect into the market from the lab. So I'm a big believer in the power of disruptive technologies. So blockchain, I think, is not quite as far along in use cases in insurance as it was in banking. But we are investigating that. We do have an active investment of use cases that we're acting on internally in AI and robotic process automation. I believe that's something that's going to become, you can deliver real value now with different forms of AI, and I think it's going to be table stakes, particularly in our industry, probably many industries, but particularly insurance. And then in addition to that, I'm a big fan of a multi-pronged approach. I don't think there's any silver bullets to how you win. It's going to take a lot of different tickets down and strategic bets in our future to get to $1 billion or get anywhere close. So we have a CVC function. We invest in startups with whom we want to partner. We've only made 2 so far since I've been there. We have a strategic partnerships group that's actively looking to cultivate strategic partnerships with people that we think are going to be important, representative of important ecosystems we need to play in. So one of our partners is Lyft. We're doing core innovation, so incremental stuff with the business, and we're also doing, I guess, disruptive innovation or innovating kind of completely outside of any constraints of the core. So we're kind of doing all of those different things in order to diversify and grow.
Sounds busy.
Yeah, we're hiring.
There's a lot going on there. Meng, how about you?
My role is essentially I head design for all Chase Digital. So all the loans, how you weave between branches and your mobile app and your online, what that should feel like. And then also some parts of JP Morgan as well, especially the wealth management pieces. So what's interesting about it is an opportunity to look at a large part of our nationwide financial landscape and connect the dots for people. So the really exciting thing to me, and the point of it, the job that I really have, is not just to keep it running and get better versions of that out there, but to use that as a platform to innovate. And it's a really great platform, I think, and that's one big thing that attracted me to even identify what are the things that people really need in their financial services, and the opportunity to actually put it out there and see and co-create with people. So as a technologist, I love everything from blockchain to AI, and yes, AI is table stakes. But I think the really exciting thing to me, the word magic again comes to mind, is actually being able to put it in practice and see where it matters to people. And from the innovation side, it's going to be the thing that we probably don't even know now, but if we keep going at it and trying it out for our customers, co-creating, really taking design thinking into design doing, I like to say, then I think we're going to find some really interesting things, and that's exciting.
Awesome. That's
Yeah.
helpful context, and I have
Yeah.
all kinds of specific follow-up questions, but I'm going to ask a broad one. If you could think about, for the folks in the room, they've probably identified with one or more of the challenges that you guys are up against and or that you have faced along your journeys. And my question is, if you think about the one tactic or strategy that you must put in place, you must follow, you must make sure is part of what you're doing, what is that strategy or tactic that you've learned and or that you're learning right now is critical, whether that's casting the right vision, whether that's getting the right partnerships in place, whether that's maybe it's something internal about aligning the organization, maybe it's something about finding the right technology. What is the thing for you, my wish for is that you all have different ones, and so we all get 4 of them at least, that we could say, oh, these are tactics we could take away and start using. Tell us what some of the tactics or strategies are that have been most effective.
I have one that comes top of mind. So I'm in a position now in taking on this new role a little over a year ago that I'm accountable to our CEO and board, but there's no one else telling me how to do the job that I'm responsible for doing. And I have lots of scars and scar tissue from trying to do innovation at other large companies. And so one of the first things that I did is to create not everybody defines an actual growth gap or innovation target financially. I think that's kind of important. My job came with one already pre-established. And then I just put a ticket down that's like a little closer in because we have to be able to hit that one if we have any chance of hitting a bigger one later. But I think, I heard it earlier, competing with the core business for financial and human resources is one of the biggest things that impedes, the most well-intended innovation programs in my experience. So the first thing that I did was create a separate funding mechanism and decision-making process and body for the innovation and growth activities so that I don't have to go to that portfolio meeting over there to go fight for why this innovation thing is really important. In 3 years, it'll start delivering some material value. I can just fund it over out of a separate bucket. So that's one that I would offer to folks.
Excellent. Excellent. How about you, Meg?
I actually voice what Imel's, one of the things he said this morning I thought really resonated. And anyway, it's about existential threats. What I found through 3 large companies now is that being able to continuously articulate what the existential threat is rallies people to support, just to build on your point. Very little else seems to be honest. So,
A scare tactic.
yes. Of course, there's a consumer side to this story, but I'll stick to one.
Just to follow on Mang, I always say facts and fear. You've covered fear. What are your peers doing that you're not doing? But I think, when you're particularly working with a large organization, maybe you're a fintech or a startup wanting to do business with a corporation, facts are so important. Whatever statistics you can gather, what you can gather about the organization, facts of find out who the influencers are in the organization, find out what their peers are doing. So having facts on paper sounds boring, but it's extremely compelling, especially when working with a large company, because if you go ask for $10 million or $5 million, they're going to want to say, why, right? And maybe you're doing something so innovative that you don't have a 3-year performa. And if you have a 3-year performa, you're not innovating. You're doing product enhancements, by the way. So without that 3-year performa buttoned up, you need to show facts, whether it's press releases, whether it's what your peer said, and peer at whatever level they're at, go get that information. When they start hearing, hey, do you know that the bank across the street is doing X, and their CEO said Y, that matters in large corporations.
Great answer.
Mine is do more, say less. So
Say more about that.
and that's it. On the do more side of the balance sheet is make an impact, deliver value, and usually where you have to start is deliver value to the organization. You can oftentimes start with customers, but it's got to translate through to the organization pretty quickly. So I really counsel make an impact. When you do that, you probably did something different. And so act differently or do different. Those are, as we get into the tool sets and methods, these are just taking a different approach at solving problems. And if you can apply that and you can demonstrate that you got a result out of that sticks with people. And now you've got a little credibility. On the say less side of it, I find that could be a huge pitfall for people. Is they start using one word a lot more than the other words, and the word's innovation. I actually stopped using that word as much as I can because even within this room, we don't have a consistent definition. Like we don't have anywhere close to a consistent definition of what that word means. It doesn't pass the opposite test in my book. This is so hot. Opposite is
Cold.
cold. we can use those two words, no problem. We all have a pretty decent understanding of it. Innovation, it does, yeah, right. So it doesn't pass.
Depends on your audience, right?
Yeah, it will depend. It also depends on your audience. But as a result, I find that word creates more confusion and creates more anxiety than using something a lot more specific. And whether that's growth, whether that's driving a new line of revenue, whether that's driving efficiency, it's things like that that help. So in say less, my point is be very, very limited in how much you say, and when you do say, use a very consistent, simple set of, for lack of a better word, lexicon to describe what you're doing. People can relate to that.
Excellent. I mean, I heard 4 great points. I hope you guys caught them. Set up a separate budget, separate resources was one of the tips. Articulate the threat. Be really clear about what the threat is. Choose to state the facts and get the data behind you, and do more and say less. Those are awesome tips. I'm going to flip this a little bit. So let's say you guys all have a tremendous amount of experience, right? I won't age all of us on the panel, but we have experience. Let's just say that. Not everybody in the room is in as senior of a role, right? So if somebody's just getting started on this journey of wanting to really drive innovation and change within their business, what's the one thing you would tell them to start with? What's the starting point?
I would say identify the influencers. If you're in an organization, figure out who the influencers are, take them to lunch, give them some credit for the idea, and drag them along, because those are the ones that have the eyes and the ears of the right people. So go make friends with the influencers and get them on your team.
I'll build on that. This was a very impressive thing that one of the young men in my team did before I arrived, but I thought it was brilliant when I heard about it. So I mentioned, obviously, our existential threat is autonomous vehicles. And so this guy worked with a local Tesla dealership to get I guess it was the original Tesla, made available to us for a day. We only have 8 executives on our senior executive team. And he basically scheduled drives for each executive where he was in the car talking to them, while the Tesla driver was demonstrating all of the, whatever it is, level 3, level 2 autonomous capability of the car. But I thought that was brilliant because he basically introduced himself to the entire executive team while informing them about how to think about this new technology and what it was going to become from where it was today.
That's awesome. That sounds like
very creative.
Very creative and potentially a little risky to say, I'm going to take you for a ride in this car. Yeah, that's great. Awesome example.
I can start.
Go ahead, Nick. Yeah.
So, 2 parts. I would say, I think Hemingway once said, most people talk a lot, but I'm probably not doing justice to a statement, but not many people listen. So when you listen completely. And that word completely is really important, especially when one is starting out. I find that a lot of people starting out nowadays feel like or think they know all the answers or have to, which is very unfortunate. And I think listening completely is very important. And then the next step is do it. Make something. It's really important. Big believer in prototyping. It's really important not to deck somebody, but to actually show something concrete about your idea.
Great. David, how about you?
Meng, I'm going to recruit you to talk to my kids about the listen completely. I think that's a great point. I'll nuance it a little bit, and I would pick, my recommendation is pick one influencer with a real problem. And it's a complex, painful problem, and help them solve that problem. Customer 1, get your first customer, and demonstrate that you can deliver value. Once you've done that, then you have the right to go to others. And oftentimes what happens is you've got a repeat customer in many instances, and you've got a net promoter. And that I've found is one of the best ways to take something different that feels a little bit unfamiliar, a little bit murky, and get a buyer very quickly because they've already got a problem that they're trying to buy for. And then they can help others demonstrate it. They will be more than happy to do that if you've solved their problem.
Excellent, excellent. What time is it? Who has?
It's 2:23.
2:23. All right. I was going to ask one more question, but I'm actually going to let the audience ask some questions. Who has a question? If you don't have one, I've got like 18 more. So, but do we have a handheld? Or I can just use my lavalier. That's fine. Who has a question? Oh, come on. Somebody's got one.
You can
Financial services
I'll give you a second.
is often characterized by risk aversion, especially in the leadership ranks. Y'all have any tips on how you overcome that?
Great question.
I'm actually right in the middle of that. So I've been at Santander for 2 months, and one of the first things that came out of my boss's mouth was, I want you to challenge our risk appetite in payments. I want you to review our policies and standards and procedures and say if we are too risk averse. So actually being asked to assess that is a pretty big step in a financial institution. So that I'm in the process of doing that right now, saying why are we at this threshold? Why have we set it lower than federal regulations? What's the reason for that? So I think that you can be really safe as a bank and have a good risk appetite, but sometimes something happened 5 years ago, or something happened 10 years ago, or someone's on the front page of the paper and there becomes this heightened sense of risk around something. So again, it's the facts. Go break it down and say, you know what, for the amount of money that we're making, this is an appropriate level of risk, not just shutting everything down. That means your revenues will go down. You can't just, that's why banks are banks. That's why we're FDIC insured, right? There's some level of risk that's okay.
I would say, I never thought I would hear myself saying this, but I happen to be on the risk committee at our company. Our whole executive team is.
They can be your friends, though.
And we have now completely rewritten our risk appetite statements because I'm pushing back and saying, why don't we have a high tolerance for experimentation in limited targeted areas? So, and I also used the phrase quite a bit in my first year, which was just, the riskiest thing for us to do is nothing, because personal auto premiums are going to peak at some point in the next 6 to 8 years and then begin declining. And the direct writers are taking more share than everybody else, so it could happen faster to us. So, it's like, I really do believe that the riskiest thing is to do nothing.
So as I listen to both of you, I'm wondering, I'm going to build on your question. Tell me if this is an appropriate build. That's great if you're in the senior role that you can do that. When you're not in that role and the senior leader is pretty risk averse, what can you do?
Educate your leader that's at their peer level.
With the facts?
With the facts, and I think, having a spirit of eating your own dog food, in the financial industry, we have different, whether it's lending or payments or mortgages or whatever it is, there are a lot of things that we can test out on employees. There's lots of things we can test with our own accounting department.
That's great.
And so sometimes when you're trying to do something new or change a procedure, do it internally. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? No one's going to know about it if it fails, right? So friends and family, man, eat your own dog food.
Something else that works well is to, there are two things. One, as leaders, we embolden the people who are actually doing the work so that they know they have the confidence and the space to actually speak up and talk about what needs to be done versus what they're told. But for the senior leadership, we all have families. We all have, we're all basically intrinsically driven by very similar things. So what helps is for them to start to understand and actually get passionate about the actual problem we're solving for the customer. And the more and more they understand that, you find that they're pushing for the change. They'll run faster than even you can. So that's something I found really works.
Would you build on it?
Yeah, I've kind of got a unique perspective, I think, on it. Maybe not. So I've worked for the three most notorious Dr. No's in most organizations. The chief risk officer, the chief legal officer, and the CEO. And in that experience, it's not that they don't want to take more risks. They just don't have a clear trust for the risks that we are taking, and there's a knowledge about that. And if you can be very clear about what is the risk, what is the actual exposure of what you're doing, and now we're getting into risk measurement, which is something that happens on a very regular basis within banks. If you can get to that level, then you can say, here's what we're doing. And what I find, it's not we're taking more risk by experimenting with internally or with your friends and family. You just found a low risk way of running that experiment and getting that information and knowledge. It's not we're taking more risk. You've really shaped yourself to take a low risk approach to it. So we'll do that from our growth fund and our growth board. We make small financial metered investments, and that is a great way of taking a very low risk approach to going and exploring something. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. There's a large misperception that we need to take more risk. I actually, as a customer of banks and as a provider to banks, I really don't want the banks taking more risk. I just want the banks being very, very smart about it, just like you would want our exchange being very, very smart about how we manage the risk of the markets.
Excellent. There's a question over here.
Yeah, you mentioned separate budget, and I think obviously that's an important one. I've gotten into the problem where you're dealing with unknowns, and unknowns about unknowns. There's no research. There's nothing to, you have the CEO saying, yeah, I'll invest $5 million in it, but I need to know a few things. And some of those things that he wants to know, you can't know. And so, have you guys developed separate metrics from the typical pipeline of products? Have you said,
Yeah,
well, okay,
it's a great
these
question.
metrics, I can buy that data, but this innovation here is in a new field with new customers that doesn't exist. So have you developed new metrics? And describe if you did that and how did that go?
So the question, in case folks in the back didn't hear it, was when you're dealing with unknowns about unknowns, how do you set metrics around that? And what have you guys learned about metrics, and what's different about the metrics that you set around this type of work?
For me, this is true at my current role, but also true at City Ventures. I think the lean startup and innovation counting approach is the best that I've found in general, which is that when you're making limited and measured, like stage-gated investments in early stage initiatives where like the size of the market's unknowable, everything is pretty much unknowable, the best you can do are leading indicators. But the other important trick there, in my opinion, is to really be spending very small amounts of money until you get enough validation that it's worthwhile to actually invest in building something real. And then just be all over it, just like a blanket. Even once you launch that initial thing, the validation isn't still, really still over until you find product market fit and all the things that real startups have to do. So I think it's just being really, relentless about that, scarcity of funding in the early stages.
Other builds that any of you have?
I agree. You can build a prototype out of a cardboard box. You don't need to have some fancy, schmancy thing and show it to some consumers and say, what do you think about this? When I was at Visa Innovation Centers, we built a car out of a rolling desk chair, right? So we didn't go buy a car, we just used a chair and drove it around like it was a car. So, inexpensive, cheap, sometimes tells a story.
Yeah, and to build on that, it shows an investment track. So if I'm you and I go to the CEO and I say, hey, I think there's an opportunity here. I think there's a big market. Here's a pretty important assumption. This is a question that we need to have the answer to. I want $10,000 to go run into the market, and I want a little air cover to go help to do this. And you come back with insights. You're not bringing any revenue back. You're not bringing anything else. You're bringing insights back. Or what you're doing is you're taking the uncertainty you had for that, and you're probably reducing it some. And there's value in reducing risk. I just call it uncertainty. And you're taking that uncertainty out. And you say, well, now I need another, you don't say $5 million now. You say, well, now my next riskiest assumption or my next riskiest question is this other one. I need $100,000 to go do that. Go build the prototype with the desk chair, run the experiment, et cetera. And you come back. By the time you get to asking for $5 million, you've probably got an investment record in that specific opportunity of probably 5, if not 20 investments that have been made into that. And at that point, that's a very different conversation because it's not the first time you're asking. We've made the mistake on the other end, and we've had an A/B test over the past 2 years where where one part of the organization basically did that sell, and we spent a lot of $1 million on something that we got surprised on. And there's others that we didn't spend the millions of dollars on that we're still continuing. It takes a lot of hard work, but we're continuing to move it forward at a pretty nice clip.
Excellent. Is there another question in the back? Yeah.
Also for Debbie on the separate budget, I understand the why, but can you talk more about how you made that happen? The money's out, has to come from somewhere. It's coming out of the operating budgets of the ongoing businesses, coming out of a capital expense budget, an R&D budget. How did you set that up?
So the question, in case anyone didn't hear it, was get real practical, Debbie, on where'd you get the money?
I'll tell two stories. One is just briefly at Citi. I ran all of our global innovation labs, and they had, in most cases, their own kind of operating budgets, and we decided we were going to manage, and they were all part of different organizations. We decided we were going to create a network, a kind of above them, that my team would lead, and that we would fund work that we didn't want every lab, and there were maybe 7 or 8 across the globe. We didn't want everybody off experimenting with blockchain or AI or stuff where we really felt like it was strategically relevant for the bank to be thinking about it centrally, but distributed through the labs. No reason to build another lab. So we created this acceleration fund. So I just made the case in that instance we had like a venture board or something that was a subset of executives at the top of the house. We reported into John Gersbach, the CFO, convinced him to give us $10 million. And then my team managed the disbursement, and we never wrote a check, for the small initial proofs of concept and stuff. We never wrote a check bigger than like a couple $100,000 for folks to go off and do something. So that was like a down payment on the kind of vision that I had for what I really wanted to do. But in my new company, basically I made the case to the CFO and the CEO that it was going to be pretty much impossible for me or my team to be successful, even having the possibility of being able to hit our long-term 10-year target without a separate, decision and funding mechanism. And so it was really just me making the case. And there's lots of McKinsey and other articles and HBR articles you could pull on. I think Scott Anthony's going to be here in a day or two. He's got a whole book on this. But basically, I just made the case that over a 3-year, we do 3-year planning, that whatever the budget was that I inherited was wholly insufficient. We needed a different mechanism. So it's really, I guess, technically off the balance sheet. And I put the whole leadership team in charge. I just said, in this instance, we're all going to operate as the growth board. We are also all the executives running the core business, and a lot of my bonus targets are core business incentives, and I said, so some of their bonus target needs to be, they have to have skin in the game for our long-term growth objectives. And so I basically made it a shared leadership objective that we're going to wear 2 hats. This one's called the growth board hat, and in this instance, we make these kinds of decisions that are basically just strategic bets on our future. And so we manage our AI portfolio there, as well as any other bets that we're making on organic or inorganic acquisitions.
Excellent.
At Nokia, I saw, and I've seen it repeated since, maybe 3 different models. So they definitely had corporate funded R&D, which is really straightforward, but also kind of constraining in some ways because you're here and the product groups are here. So. And then there were also things where, if something were strategic enough, back to the existential threat or where do you want to be in 5 years as a business and so on, I was able in one case to literally go up to the board to pitch the idea and get just enough funding. So it's not X millions because it's great, but let's prove it out because we want to see what it really means for us. So more like a pilot and do it quickly. So that kind of funding I've seen, absolutely can happen. And another thing I've seen, and happens quite a lot, is, things like AI, for example, or blockchain. We have a limited pool of talent, and so what happens is every product group wants to know what it means to them. So you can create a small center of excellence, so to speak, and have that funded and tied goals to different product groups as well.
Excellent. Well, we are just about out of time. I want to take a minute to thank you guys. I feel like the hour kind of flew by.
Yeah.
And I'm sure lots of folks probably even have some follow-up questions, so they'll probably be looking for you to ask some additional questions. But thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience and a lot of practical ideas for us. I hope that you guys all got good notes on those practical ideas. There were a lot of them that I took notes on and took away. So thank you guys. We really appreciate
Ann.
you guys being
Thank
here to
you.
do this.
Thank you.